So welcome to our first in this series. We have some great content lined up for you today. This is the first in a monthly series that we're going to be doing that will hopefully help you become a better EMUE scripter and get some familiarity with some of the commands and some of the techniques that you can use to make your scripts even better. Joining us today will be Kelly Blackman, who is our EMUE product manager, who many of you have already met in person or on the phone. I've had email conversations with. And then also myself, Mike Harris. I'm the lead EMUE trainer and analyst and had taken Kelly's positions. So today during this section, we have several commands that we wanted to go through to give you guys extra tools in your tool belt to use. The commands that we're going to be going over are listed up here. You should be seeing them now. So there's scroll web element, scroll web page, remove blank columns from list, remove blank list members, export to list to Excel, which some of you probably already use, export list to delimited file, and execute Excel command, and finally update Excel value. So without further ado, I am going to kick control over to Kelly, and he's going to take us through the first half of these commands.
So good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for taking time and joining us. It's really good to get the group together, I think, because there's so much stuff that EMUE can do that sometimes we don't get a chance to really share everything to its maximum that we possibly can. So this gives us an opportunity to have a conversation with you guys again, just to teach you some new things that we've added and maybe revisit some of the other things that you probably heard before. But so hopefully you get something out of this. The things that I want to talk about first is a new command that we built recently. It's called scroll web element. Okay, and so scroll web element was really designed for, if you think about in Saurian, this is going to be Saurian specific for these couple commands here. So one of the challenges is with working in many products is that we have to balance out material that we talk about. So hopefully this stuff in the beginning is going to be a little more Saurian related or web page related. The last part of it is going to be, pretty broad as far as Excel and that kind of stuff goes. So everybody can get something out of that. But for this particular one, scroll web element, the basis for this particular command was to give users a way to have EMUE scroll inside the browser. Okay, so there's two different commands here and two different types of scrolling that you can do. If you're familiar with Saurian, you know that sometimes there are elements that actually have scroll bars and inside the actual main browser. So there's a browser scroll bar and there is an element scroll bar, if you will. And so what this command does is allow you to actually scroll an element itself. So if you think about the revising counter details where you have all of those different fields where you can go and update, and there's a scroll bar on the inside of that. All those things that you update are inside a container, and you can scroll that container. There's also another place which many of you are familiar with probably is the enhanced work list. Okay, so the enhanced work list is a work list that users can create, but it loads dynamically. And so if you're ever processing those kinds of work lists and things like that, you need to scroll down in order to be able to continue to load records. Okay, so to demonstrate this particular command, I'm going to hop over here to Saurian real quick and log in and kind of show you what I'm talking about. So we get here on the main home page here, and there's this billing exception work list. Okay, it's got 50 records on there. Sometimes there are a lot more than that, but once we click on that work list, we see that not everything is loaded. We see the scroll bar on the right-hand side, and as we scroll down, more entries load. And so this was really the main foundation for building this particular command. And so the command is really simple. There is a scroll web element, then there's a parameter for a number, which is a percentage. How much do I want to scroll down the bar? And it's in relative, basically it'd be 90% of the screen size. Okay, so that's what we would be doing here, 90%. If you did something like 10,000, of course, it's only going to go over. It's not going to go over 100%. But the other thing here that you need to identify is the thing that you want to scroll. And so we know, based on using the web script builder here and some of my past experience by identifying these things, all this entire list here is inside a div section, and it's called ID work items table. Okay, and so what we can see is when we run this command here, if I close this down, you'll see some things load, and as we scroll, more items load until we get down to the bottom of it where we can't scroll anymore. So now we see the scroll bars all the way down. This is a really cool way to work this work list. In the past, in order to load things, you actually had to click on a row and expand it, click on another row and load it. And sometimes there were challenges with does it always load like it is supposed to? So it made it really difficult to use these work lists and process them all from start to finish. This command here makes it pretty easy to be able to load all the records on here. Okay. So what you can do is once you have everything loaded, you can see 50 of 50. You can do a command you're probably all familiar with get web table. Okay, and this is going to actually pull the entire contents of the table into a list called work list. Okay, and so we can see everything that we have now. We've got 50 records. So before I scrolled all the way down, it's probably only 30 or so displaying. Until I scrolled all the way down to the bottom, I wasn't able to get the entire list. Okay, so that's the whole basis for this command here. And so the other thing is scroll web element. While you can scroll down, if it's a positive number, if you come back up here and make it a negative number, it actually scrolls back in the opposite direction. Okay, so you have the ability to scroll a single element up or down, and based on the percentage that you want to. Okay, so we scrolled all the way down, we grabbed our table, and so that's scroll web element. All right, so going back over to the presentation, again, it gives the example here. Elements don't populate the entire list until they're scrolled through and sorted. And so this is a perfect example of where this would be applied. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's an element. What if I want to scroll a page itself? Sometimes you need to scroll down in order to be able to, or scroll across to be able to click on certain things. And so we've also got a command that we rolled out at the same time, which is scroll web page. Okay, and so this actually scrolls the main browser control. And so if we go over and take a look at something like this, I'm going to jump back over to my script, and I'm going to open a web page. This is just going to take us to an internal Databound site that we have for testing. Actually, it's a dashboard page. And so if you scroll using just scroll web page and no other parameters at the end of it, I believe it does 90%. Yep. 90% is the default if you don't supply a percentage. So we're just going to automatically assume we're going to scroll down 90% of the page size. Okay, and then if you specify you want to do more than that, then you can feel free to add a parameter, and the same thing applies here. So we watch this. Okay, we see it scroll down. If we run the same one, it just keeps ticking down. Okay, if we do scroll something like scroll web page and 1,000, okay, that's going to take us all the way to the bottom because 1,000 is pretty well more than the current size of the page. Okay, the other thing is if we wanted to go back up and simulate kind of like a home keystroke, we want to go all the way back up to the top. Okay, again, the same thing works here with the negative number. So it gives us the ability to have a little more control over the browser if we need it. So that's scroll web element and scroll web page. Okay. So a couple of other things I'm going to do here before I hand it over to Mike. Working with a list. A couple of things we wanted to talk about here. If you're familiar with EMUE and the string manipulations and functionality that we have in there with it, as far as cleaning up text and things like that, you're probably familiar with a trim command. Okay, so that typically, our trim command is going to remove white spaces on the front of a variable and at the end of a variable, so it takes off, non-printable characters that you can't see or spaces. Okay, so sometimes with lists as well, you run into issues like you have here in these first two columns where you have nothing but blank columns. And so, maybe you want to clean up the data before you export it and send it to someone. Sometimes when you read in from Excel is another scenario where you might get blank rows. If someone has gone in manually and deleted content from cells, Excel actually remembers that there once was content there. And so sometimes when you read in from Excel, you might get blank rows or you might get blank columns. And so these two commands are pretty cool because this, it works in the same fashion as you would think of a trim. So one is to remove any adjacent blank columns from a list, and same thing with rows. So if there are rows that have completely no data, columns that have completely no data in it, this is actually going to trim those off and give you a neater, cleaner list, if you will. So it helps prevent some errors and things like that if you actually have rows that don't have data. Okay, it takes a step out of having to check to see if that exists. So the first one I'm just going to run is remove blank columns, and so that's actually going to take these first two off of this list that I have that we pulled from Sorian. So remove blank columns from work list. Okay, our work list refreshes. Now we just have the columns that have data. Okay, remove blank list members. We don't have any blank rows here, so this is actually not going to do. You're not going to see any difference in what the actual command is going to do. But if it did, it would work the same way. So remove blank list members. Okay, it's going to run it on the list and see if anything's there. If it's not, no big deal. It's not going to generate an error or anything like that. So that's really how those two things work in conjunction with one another. So I encourage you to use that, prevent you from getting unexpected data whenever you are processing something in a script. Okay, so let me just hop back over here to the presentation real quick and let me jump through those commands. So we provide here on this PowerPoint deck, which I'm not sure if that was sent out as part of the invitation or not. If it's not, we can make this available to you. This is also in the help file. So if you're familiar with our help file, just F1 on these commands, and it'll take you to what the parameters that you need. Pretty straightforward for these, just the command name and the list you want to operate on. Okay, so just a quick summary here and a little bit more detail in this section over here, and then you've got the syntax below about what's required for each command. So remove blank columns, remove blank lists. Okay, pretty self-explanatory for those. Okay, so that's what I wanted to talk about for this part of it. For right now, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike, and he's going to cover some more things that we can do with Excel. And then at the end of it, when we have some time, if you guys have questions or anything specific you want to ask me about the scrolling or working with these lists, then we can revisit that then. But Mike, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
So thank you, Kelly, for taking us through those commands. Let's move on to our next one here. This is an old favorite of most people. So most people on the call have probably used export list to Excel. If not, this is a very powerful command that allows you to take your list data and export it into an Excel file. And there are a lot of parameters on here. As you can see down here at the bottom with the syntax, export list to Excel supports 3 optional parameters where you can provide a sheet name, so you can specify where you're placing that data. You can tell it in an export mode, and then you can also tell it whether to maintain cell type. And this is one thing, maintain cell type came up about 6 or 8 months ago, and it's a very powerful thing that actually goes in and queries each cell within your Excel sheet when it's exporting the data and tries to figure out what type of formatting it has on it. So for example, if you have a currency cell, when EMUE exports it in there, it will try and match that and place it into that cell as a currency type. The one warning I will give everyone is if you use maintain cell type on a large list of data, it can slow it down because of a limitation with the Excel driver where it has to query each cell individually. So you can end up with a much larger processing time than if you just plop the data in there and did some manual formatting thereafter. So just be careful with that one. So let me go back over to my script right here. And I have the list that we were working with earlier from Sorian. We pulled it out, we've got our data, we trimmed off all of our columns and our blank rows, and it's ready to be exported. So you can see here I just have a basic export set up. I have whatever list I want to export, followed by the path name of that list. When I step through here, we don't see much happen. It just goes and it exports it. So if I go to the file that I specified, I'll now see a training export Excel document. And I can open that up, and then I can manipulate my data just like I normally would. And you can see all of my data here in a plain format. You can see that it does not expand the cells at all, but all of your data is there. So if you double click on it, you haven't lost any data by doing this. So let me go back. I'm not going to save my changes, and I'm going to minimize this. And our next command here is a newer command that does a very similar thing to export to Excel. And this is exporting it to a delimited file. Now in the past, what our users would do would set up a loop, and they would log out a line with a variable and then a comma and then a variable and then a comma and then a variable and then a comma and so on and so forth. But that was really time intensive for not only scripting, but it also had to go through that loop. So part of our feedback was that it'd be great if we could get something that was a little more powerful to do that for us. So we now have export list to delimited file. And as you can see here, the syntax for this is export list to delimited file. You're going to provide a list name and a file destination just like you would with the export list to Excel. But at the end, you're going to tack on a delimiter. And this could be any character that you want. You could use commas, you could use semicolons, you could use the letter A if you wanted to. It doesn't really matter to EMUE what you use. It's going to just insert it between the variables that are specified on that list. So if I come back here to my script and we take a look at what I have here, I've got my export list to delimited file, my work list, my path, and then at the end I've specified a pipe character. So when I step through this, it's going to go through my list and it's going to export that for me. If I look in my file, this is going to come in as a CSV type. And when I open that up, it should have pipe delimiters instead of column delimiters. Now in Excel, it doesn't look terribly good because it tries to still separate it out by columns sometimes, but you can see that all of the pipe characters are in there. This is a great way of making a standard file that you can send out to anyone you need to. And let me just go back here, minimize that. The next thing we have is execute Excel command, and this is a pretty powerful tool that we have. And when we're using an Excel file, a lot of the times we have something in place, possibly a report, that we want to either insert or update information into, but we don't want to use an entire list. We might just want to use a variable. So using this command, we have to specify a path to our database, the command that we want to use, either insert or update. We need to tell it the Excel version so that it knows the correct driver to use, whether we want it to replace single quotes, and whether it contains a header in the file. So let me switch back over to EMUE real quick, and we can take a look at a real example of this. So I've got 3 different examples here, and you can see I'm using the training export that I just did, and I'm going to update sheet 1, and I want to set self-pay equal to med-pay, where self-pay equals Medicare. So all I'm doing is I'm going through that entire sheet, and you can see down here self-pay. We have Medicare, Blue Cross, self-pay. So instead, what I want to do is I want to go in and I just want to change that to med-pay, just for fun. And then I've specified my driver, not to replace quotes, and then with header. I'm going to step through this, and it'll take a second. It is taking a little bit longer because I'm on my list tab, and each time you do that, it reprocesses the list. So to run this a little quicker, I could move to one of the other tabs, but I'd like you guys to see what's actually going on here. So I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to look at my Excel document. And typically with Excel, you want the Excel document closed if you're exporting to it or importing from it, because EMUE wants to put a lock on that file. As I said, though, if you look at the self-pay column, Medicare is now MedPay. So it's actually that value in all of those columns. So this is a very powerful way of updating your data on a bulk basis. Coming back to this next one, I'm going to insert into that sheet. I'm going to put the values testing sample into the self-paid column, and I'm telling it that it has headers again. So I'm going to step through that, and there it is. So I've inserted a column, or inserted a value into the column based on parameters that I gave it. This last example, I'm actually going to update a single column. So I'm going to update one single value to call it reporting column. I run that command. I'll open that document back up. And you'll notice in this command that there's a lot of SQL type statements. And the SQL type statements are very similar in Excel, but if you are going to write an update or an insert statement, I would recommend looking up the Excel syntax for it. Or, like Kelly said, we will make this script available as well as the PowerPoint, so you can use these as references if you're ever writing something for yourself. So if we look over here, reporting column's been inserted, and now if I wanted to use that data, start inserting data below that. So I can make a whole new column based on variables that I take my script. And we won't save that, we'll minimize that. And we'll come back to our presentation. The next one here is update Excel value. So update Excel value is a simpler way of doing an update statement, basically. So instead of doing the execute Excel command and knowing all of the syntax, we've made a much easier command so that you can update a single value within an Excel document. As you can see here, similar syntax. What we do is we place the value next to the command, give a path to the spreadsheet, provide a worksheet name, a row, a column, and then we also have the option here to maintain that cell type. Here it won't have as much of an impact because you should only be updating one cell in that document. So if I head back to my EMUE script, what I'm going to do is I'm going to update the value Smith-Jones into the third column, second row. So I process that command, and I'm going to bring up my document again. And now you can see in my third row, second column, is the name Smith-Jones. So much, much easier way than doing the execute Excel command. But if you need power, I would use execute Excel command. If you need brevity and ease of use, I would use the update Excel value. So both are valid ways of getting data into Excel in a more robust way than just plopping your list into a new tab. So I'm going to go ahead and close that and minimize that. This last example here is just something I wanted to throw in just to show you that everything came in right and to see how our data would then look if we had that new work list. And everything's in there.
Thank you for watching. We look forward to seeing you in the next webinar.